It was a freezing January night, the kind where the air bites at your skin and the snow blankets everything in silence. Evergreen Academy stood like a relic from the past, its arched gates creaking in the wind and its Gothic towers disappearing into the dark, snowy sky. My shift as the night gatekeeper had just begun, and the storm outside was getting worse. By midnight, the entire campus felt like a ghost town. The wind howled through the trees, and the streetlights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the snow-covered courtyard. Sitting in the tiny security booth by the front gate, I stared at the CCTV monitors, watching the empty hallways of the old school. It wasn't long before the first unsettling thing happened. The gate creaked open. I knew for a fact it was locked. I had secured it myself earlier in the evening. Yet there it was, swinging slowly as if someone had pushed it. The snow beneath it was undisturbed, no footprints. Just the wind, I told myself, even though my gut told me otherwise. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped outside, the crunch of snow under my boots the only sound besides the wind. The gate hung open, swaying slightly. I pushed it shut and secured the lock again, glancing up at the looming facade of Evergreen Academy. The windows were dark, but I felt like something, or someone, was watching me from inside. I was halfway back to the booth when I saw him. A figure standing at the far end of the courtyard, barely visible through the snowstorm. He was facing the building, his silhouette unnervingly still. My heart pounded in my chest as I called out, "Hey! You're not supposed to be here! Who are you?" The figure didn't respond. He didn't move. Fingers tightening around the flashlight, I moved closer, my boots sinking deeper into the snow. I said, "Who are you?" My voice echoed in the stillness. The man stood in silence, and as I drew nearer, I realized there was something wrong about him. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and his body was covered in tattered clothes that flapped in the icy wind. Then he turned to me. His face, if you could call it that, was grotesque. Sunken eyes, hollow and black, stared back at me. His mouth stretched unnaturally wide, splitting his skin as if it were being torn apart by the grin. My stomach dropped as he let out a guttural, otherworldly screech that echoed off the school walls. I stumbled back, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The figure started walking. No, crawling towards me on all fours, his limbs bending and twisting in ways that no humans should. I turned and bolted for the security booth, slamming the door shut behind me. The monitors flickered. One by one, the cameras inside the school started cutting out, replaced by static. My radio crackled to life with a sound like scratching nails, followed by a voice that wasn't mine. "Why did you open the gate?" I stared at the screen, frozen in place. A low, inhuman laugh echoed through the radio. The sound sent chills down my spine. On one monitor, I caught a glimpse of the figure inside the school, crawling through the main hallway. How the hell did he get inside? My hands trembled as I picked up the landline to call for help. The phone rang twice before the line went dead. The lights in the security booth flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. A loud thud came from the roof. I knew I couldn't stay in the booth. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't going to stop until it found me. I grabbed my flashlight, flung the door open, and ran toward the building, thinking I might find safety in numbers, if anyone else was even left alive inside. The hallways were pitch black, except for the faint light from my flashlight bouncing off the cracked tiles. Every step echoed like a drumbeat, each one louder than the last. The air inside felt heavier, colder, as if the very walls of the school were alive, pressing down on me. Then I heard it. A whisper. "Meech." It was coming from everywhere and nowhere. My name stretched out in that same guttural, unnatural voice. I swung the flashlight wildly, but the beam caught only empty classrooms and broken lockers. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pressed forward, deeper into the school. And then I saw him again. The figure stood at the end of the hallway, his distorted grin glowing faintly in the dark. I turned to run, but my legs felt like lead. Behind me, the whispers grew louder, merging into a deafening cacophony. "Don't look back. "Don't look back," I whispered to myself, forcing my feet to move. I stumbled into the gymnasium and slammed the door shut, leaning against it as I tried to catch my breath. The room was silent except for my pounding heart. But as I turned the flashlight to scan the gym, my blood ran cold. He was there, hanging from the ceiling, twisted like a spider, his head upside down and that hideous grin inches from my face. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The flashlight fell from my trembling hands, clattering onto the floor, its beam casting wild shadows across the gym. His face, no, his thing, hung inches from mine, his sunken black eyes fixed on me. His grin widened unnaturally, splitting his pale, rotting skin further as a viscous black liquid dripped from his lips. Then he spoke. "Why did you open the gate?" His voice sounded like it came from the depths of a well, layered with a chorus of whispers. Before I could respond, or even think, he lunged at me. I dove to the side, barely avoiding his outstretched claws. The air was filled with the sound of ripping fabric as he tore through the gym mat where I'd just stood. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the flashlight and pointing it at him. He shrieked, covering his face with one elongated hand. The light seemed to hurt him, but not for long. With a guttural growl, he sprang toward me again, his movements so fast they were a blur. I ran. My legs burned as I sprinted through the gym, throwing open the double doors and bolting into the hallway. The creature was close behind me. I could hear its claws scraping against the walls and its guttural breaths echoing through the corridors. My mind raced as I tried to think of a way to escape. Every door I passed seemed locked or led to a dead end. Then I remembered the basement. It wasn't a great plan. In fact, it was probably a terrible one, but I didn't have a choice. The basement housed the old boiler room, and it was the only place I could think of where I might be able to hide. Turning sharply, I threw open the door to the stairwell and rushed down into the darkness, my flashlight flickering wildly. The air grew colder the deeper I descended. My breath misted in front of me, and the scent of damp concrete and rust filled my nose. At the bottom of the stairs, I shoved open the heavy metal door to the boiler room and stepped inside, slamming it shut behind me. It was pitch black except for the weak beam of my flashlight. The room was a labyrinth of pipes and rusting machinery, the walls dripping with condensation. I crouched behind one of the massive boilers, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. The silence stretched on, broken only by the faint dripping of water. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought I might have lost him. Then I heard it, the faint scrape of claws on concrete. He was in the stairwell. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle a scream as the sound grew louder. The door creaked open, and I saw his shadow spill across the room. He moved slowly, deliberately, his clawed fingers tapping against the metal walls as he searched for me. His voice echoed through the room, sending chills down my spine. I held my breath, pressing myself further against the cold metal of the boiler. He was getting closer. I could hear his uneven footsteps, the scrape of his claws against the pipes. And then he stopped. Silence. I dared to peek around the edge of the boiler and my blood ran cold. He was standing just a few feet away, his back to me, his head tilted as if listening. I tried to stay perfectly still, but the flashlight, slick with sweat, slipped from my grip. It clattered onto the floor, its beam rolling across the room and landing squarely on him. He turned, his hollow eyes locking onto mine. And then he screamed. The sound was inhuman, a mix of rage and agony that reverberated through the room and rattled the very walls. He lunged toward me, his movements a blur. I ducked and scrambled backward, my hands fumbling for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around a heavy metal wrench. As he came at me, I swung with everything I had. The wrench connected with a sickening crunch and he reeled back, shrieking in pain. I didn't wait to see if it had done any lasting damage. I turned and ran, darting through the maze of pipes and machinery, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear him behind me, his claws scraping against the metal, his guttural growls growing louder with each passing second. My legs felt like they were on fire, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I spotted a ladder at the far end of the room, leading up to a hatch in the ceiling. It was my only way out. Summoning every ounce of strength, I leapt onto the ladder and started climbing. The creature's claws slashed at the air beneath me, narrowly missing my feet. I reached the top and shoved the hatch open, pulling myself through just as his clawed hand grabbed my ankle. I kicked wildly, my boot connecting with his face. He let out a howl of rage and fell back into the darkness. I slammed the hatch shut and collapsed onto the snowy ground outside, gasping for air. The storm had eased, and the first light of dawn was breaking on the horizon. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I ran to my car, fumbled with the keys, and drove away from Evergreen Academy as fast as I could. I never went back to Evergreen. The school was closed down shortly after that night. I never went back to Evergreen. The school was closed down shortly after that night, though the official reports never mentioned anything about what really happened. I don't know if the creature is still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. But I do know this. I'll never work another night shift again, and I'll never, ever open the gate.